It gives me great pleasure to welcome Your Excellencies, the heads of state and governments, and the heads of delegations of the non-aligned movement countries. This grouping of countries accounts for 4.46 billion people of the world. It was started by our far-sighted elders in the persons of His Excellency Sukarno of Indonesia, His Excellency Jawaharlal Nehru of India, His Excellency Gamal Abdel Nasser of Egypt, and His Excellency Zhou Enlai of China, when they met in Bandung, Indonesia, in 1955. That time I was in primary 3 in the school. The first summit of the non-aligned movement took place in Belgrade, Yugoslavia, in 1961, and was attended by Afghanistan, Algeria, Burma, Cambodia, Ceylon, Congo, Cuba, Cyprus, Ethiopia, Ghana, Guinea Conakry, I think here we're talking of Guinea Conakry, India, Indonesia, Iraq, Lebanon, Mali, Morocco, Nepal, Saudi Arabia, Somalia, Sudan, Tunisia, United Arab Republic, Egypt, Yemen, and Yugoslavia. The emergence of the non-aligned movement was a necessary antidote to the irrational polarization of the world of that time between the capitalist Western countries and the communist, mainly Eastern countries. By the early 1960s, our student group was already beginning to be active. We were the third generation of the African and colonial freedom fighters. The first generation had been the African-American Pan-Africanists, such as Marcus Garvey, George Padmore, W.B. Du Bois, that had been joined by those who founded the African National Congress of South Africa in 1912. By 1900, the whole of Africa, except for Ethiopia, had been colonized. This direct colonization of the whole of the African continent was the culmination of 400 years of the plunder of Africa by the evil imperialist forces in the form of slave trade and the genocide wars that went with it. The newly discovered Americas, Asia, China, and the Pacific, Australia, New Zealand, and so on, had been similarly aggressed, colonized, semi-colonized, like in the case of China, and plundered. Africa's capitulation, Africa's surrender had been in part on account of our egocentric chiefs and kings, who out of selfishness could not unite us to fight these evil people. The second generation of the African freedom fighters were people like Mzee Jomo Kenyatta of Kenya, Mwalimu Nyerere of Tanzania, Nelson Mandela of South Africa, etc., who emerged in the 1940s. When we therefore came on the scene in the 1960s, we were generation 3 of the anti-colonial fighters. We seriously studied the interplay of forces that had ultimately led Africa in such a calamity. In those studies, we used the instrument of political economy, which is a study that helps us to discover the fundamental laws that govern the motion of society from one social system to another. What prompts society to change from one form of social system to another? That was our big study. We had to study the dynamics of social change. In that study, we discovered that man, the Homo sapiens sapien, who emerged here in Africa 4.5 million years ago, had been the main actor. Initially, this wise man, that is what Homo sapiens sapien means, was coping with the oppression of man by nature in the form of the floods, the droughts, the diseases, the wild animals, the earthquakes, etc. These natural phenomena were, of course, oppressing other creatures, such as the wild animals, the plants, as well. However, those other creatures could do little or nothing to tame nature. The only thing they could do was to adapt themselves to nature in order to survive. That is how the beaver in the cold climates hibernates during the winters so as to survive. It is only a man that has the ability to try and tame the natural phenomena and harness them to improve his quality of life. Why does man have this capacity? It is because of the 3 characteristics of man. These are a superior brain that is able to reason and not only act by instinct, a hand that can make and use tools to do work, and bipedalism, ability to walk on 2 legs with the head up instead of the head being down like a reptile, trying to navigate among ground-based obstacles, that enables man to see far and think. These characteristics enabled man to invent tools, starting with stone tools, wooden tools, iron tools, until today, when he is able to make tractors and machine tools, etc. These tools enabled man to make scientific inventions that precipitated qualitative and quantitative changes in society. The invention of fire 1.5 million years ago caused society to move from dwelling in trees to dwelling in caves and on the ground generally. caves were more comfortable than the trees. The invention of the domestication of crops around 10,000 years ago, the domestication of the livestock around 12,000 years ago, the invention of the iron around 1,500 BC, the steam engine, the printing press, electricity, the railway, the automobiles, the aircraft, the automation, vaccines, the invention of penicillin, the invention of quinine, etc., enabled man to cope better and enabled him to harness natural phenomena and items for the betterment of his life. Our study of political economy of creation and society, therefore, enabled us to discover that the best primer of changes, primer means initiator of changes in society, is the development of science and technology. Therefore, societies that move forward their levels of science and technology lay a basis for positive social change and should be encouraged by the progressive forces of the world. This encouragement should be irrespective of the social systems of the concerned societies. However, when man's inventiveness was handling the operation of man by nature, another form of operation of man emerged. This was the operation of man by fellow men. So man had two problems now: operation of man by nature, operation of man by fellow men. This was the operation of man by fellow men. Karl Marx is one of the few analysts that seems to have tackled this new problem for man accurately. He pointed out that it was only during the time of the primitive communalism, when man was still living in hunter-gatherer societies, that society was free of oppression of man by fellow men. Thereafter, all subsequent social systems had elements of operation of fellow men of varying degrees. This was in the form of wars of conquest, wars of aggression, slavery, imperialism, neocolonialism, colonialism, feudalism, primitive capitalist accumulation, chauvinism, etc. These elements of exploitation are totally unnecessary and only propelled by greed. Was it necessary for the Ottomans to block the Europeans from using the Silk Road that had been pioneered by Marco Polo when they captured Constantinople in 1453? When the Europeans were thus blocked, they started looking for a sea route around Africa, led by the Portuguese, one of them being Prince Henry, the navigator of Portugal. This was a legitimate and positive response forced on the Europeans by the unreasonable actions of the Ottomans. As a consequence of that effort, Christopher Columbus reached the Americas in 1492, and Vasco da Gama went around the Cape of Good Hope in South Africa in 1498. By this time, the positive efforts of the Europeans looking for a sea route around Africa had already started being polluted by the evil of slave taking by the Portuguese. It is said that the first slaves were captured by the Portuguese in the year 1441. The two great achievements of discovering the Americas and going around Africa by sea soon proved harbingers of great evil to Africa, the Americas, and Asia. As bullies, the Europeans used their progress in technology of shipbuilding and the use of gunpowder to conquer Africa, the Americas, Asia, and the Pacific. European looting of the rest of humanity through slavery, imperialism, colonialism, semi-colonialism, and extermination of the indigenous people in some cases went on for 500 years. Instead of humanity, significant advances in shipbuilding, the wider use of gunpowder, which had been discovered by the Chinese around 800 BC, the wider use of quinine against malaria that the Spanish had learned from the indigenous Indians of the Americas, the printing press, the steam engine, and all the other inventions were to spend 500 years in anti-colonial wars to expel the evil parasites. In the case of Africa, it is only in 1994 that the indigenous people of South Africa regained control of their country. So we had to spend 500 years dealing with idiotic schemes by greedy people. The oppressors miscalculate when they use their temporary advantage in science and technology to think that they can use that to indefinitely oppress other people. The oppressed will learn, catch up, and defeat the oppressor. That is why empires always all collapse. All empires always collapse. The idea of empires is an evil idea. I don't want to impose my beliefs on you, but as a Christian, in the book of the Acts of Apostles, it says that empires are evil. You go and read the book of the Acts of Apostles. St. Paul describes empires as evil. People are supposed to be free, not to be conquered by empires. We should only have free associations of nations, people of common or shared origin, interacting for mutual advantage with the peoples of the world. Therefore, we, the resistance fighters of Uganda, are flabbergasted and look down with contempt the philosophical, ideological, and strategic shallowness of some of the actors of the world. Why not respect freedom of everybody if you say you are a Democrat? If you say you are a Democrat, why don't you respect the freedom of everybody? How can you say you are a Democrat and yet you want other people to be slaves? Why do you not seek influence? Why do you not seek to influence people by your good example instead of manipulation, lectures, and threats. Again, in the book of Matthew, it says, "Let your light so shine before men that they see your good deeds and praise your Father who is in heaven." Influence people by example, not by threats and manipulations. Chauvinists of race, religion, tribe, or gender should stop wasting our time and opportunities with their shallow schemes. Action will inevitably invite counteraction. Oppression will invite resistance. That is why we, the resistance fighters of Uganda, only fight just wars. We abhor unjust wars. The promoters of unjust wars lose most of the time. These are wars of imperialism, conquest, domination, etc. In the 500 years of European aggression against Africa, it was only from 1912, when the African National Congress was founded in South Africa, that modern freedom fighters came forward to lead the traditional illiterate African chiefs to defend our sovereignty, except for Menelik of Ethiopia, who defeated the Italian aggressors in 1896. It took the modern African resistance fighters only 82 years to clear the whole of Africa of these invaders, with South Africa being the last to get freedom in 1994. In that 82 years, you had the Mau Mau in Kenya, the resistance wars in Algeria, Mozambique, Angola, Guinea-Bissau, Namibia, South Africa, Zimbabwe, etc. We won everywhere. Our African brothers in all these wars won. But after losing a lot of time, why had the imperialists thought of dominating us in the first place? Therefore, the non-aligned movement was correct. The illogical polarization of 1950s, 60s, 70s between the capitalists and communists was wrong. Why should new ideas cause tension? This was the mistake of people like Metternich of Austria-Hungary, who thought that the new ideas of capitalism that were challenging the feudal order in Europe could be blocked by war. The Austro-Hungarian Empire ended up disappearing from the face of the earth, and capitalism did not stop spreading. Our stand is that the world should concentrate on the common human problems: prosperity through trade, and that's why I'm very happy to see you here. When you are outside there, you may get stereotypes about Africa, that Africa, they have no food, they are starving. Here we are dying from food. We have so much food here. So those images which you see about some bad situations, don't think they are represent the whole of Africa. Africa has got everything. Here we have everything. What we need from other people are markets and investments. But we shall not only sell to you, we shall also buy from you. We are not like others who want only to sell to others but not buy from them. So I'm very glad to have this big presence of people from the world so that we can interact with you. Our stand is that the world should concentrate on the common human problems: prosperity through trade, the advance of science and technology to deal with human problems, the environment, crime, and terrorism. The future is bright if we act right. These are indeed the Bandung principles of 1, respect for fundamental human rights and for the purposes of the principles of the Charter of the United Nations, respect for the sovereignty and territorial integrity of all nations, recognition of the equality of all races and of equality of all nations, large and small, abstention from intervention or interference in the internal affairs of another country, respect for the right of each nation to defend itself singly or collectively in conformity with the Charter of the United Nations, abstention from the use of arrangements of collective defense of any of the big powers, abstention by any country from exerting pressure on other countries. 7, refraining from acts of threats, of aggression, or use of force against the territorial integrity or political independence of any country. Settlement of all international disputes by peaceful means, such as negotiation, conciliation, arbitration, or judicial settlement, as well as other peaceful means of the parties' own choice in conformity with the Charter of the United Nations. Promotion of mutual interests and cooperation, and respect for justice and international obligation. It is on these principles that the NAM was founded. We, the resistance fighters of Uganda, can testify that by synthesizing the package of ideas have got very good results. Using the ideas of the free market, we use the free market principles. Like this hotel is a joint venture between the government and the private sector. In some cases, the government can have some parastatals, but in most of the cases, we encourage the private sector. So we use the ideas of the free market combined with the ideas of selective state intervention in the economy in some sectors like banking, energy, transport, etc., and also bring back some aspects of the capitalist institutions, such as the reformed cultural institutions. Uganda, although starting from a very low base, has had growth rates of 6.2% per annum for the last 37 years. We are therefore not impressed and cannot be part of the morbid, I want the word morbid, sickly, of the morbid bigotry of uni-ideological thinking of this or that type. When somebody says, this is the only correct idea, this is the only correct idea. If you don't believe in this, I will attack you. Really? The universe has been here for the last 30 billion years. This earth has been here for 30 billion years. The human society has been here for the last 4.5 million years. Now you come, within 20 years, you think what you think is the only correct thing? You must be sick. You therefore should not have the audacity to impose on the society you live in, let alone the world, your narrow, uni-ideological orientation. Here in Uganda, we rejected the concept of uni-ideological positions. Our movement started as a multi-ideological political force. We had capitalists, we had socialists, we had Marxists, we had feudalists. They're all. That's why we call our movement, not party. Because a party is uni-ideological. Communist party, capitalist party, those are uni-ideological. Our force is multi-ideological because that's what fits our society. In conclusion, the strength of the non-aligned movement should be used for influence, particularly at the UN, for the effective transformative process for a better common future. In the negotiations for the Pact of the Future, the outcome document of the upcoming United Nations Summit of the Future, to be held in New York in September 2024, we should clearly define priorities that favor developing countries by maintaining unity, solidarity, and collective coordination among our member states in line with the Bandung principles. I assure you all that my team, led by the permanent representative in New York, has my full support to chair the coordinating bureau of the non-aligned movement. I thank you and I welcome you all to Uganda. Thank you very much.
Do you want to watch more videos like this one? If yes, subscribe to our channel and press the bell icon next to it. We have decided to bring videos on something nobody talks about: African politics, economy, and increasing power. Thanks for watching, and until the next video, stay tuned.
Tell us what you think in the comment section. Like and share the video, and subscribe so that you don't miss any of our African videos. It's the best way to support us.
Good afternoon. Welcome to the Whitney and Betty Macmillan Center for International and Area Studies. Apologies for the delay. I think it's in everybody's interest to be more comfortable here. My name is Nuno Montero. I'm the Director of International Security Studies here and the Associate Professor of Political Science. It's my great pleasure to introduce Professor John J. Mearsheimer from the University of Chicago, who happened to be my dissertation advisor back before the meteor came and killed all the dinosaurs. This is the second of these three lectures here. All the lectures are on the topic of liberal dreams and international realities. Today's lecture will be titled The False Promise of Liberal Hegemony, and is to be followed by tomorrow, a lecture at the same time in room 203 tomorrow. Notice the change in room, also upstairs, but the other room. Tomorrow's lecture is titled The Case for Restraint, and it will be followed by a reception. We hope to see you here again tomorrow. Thank you.
Thank you very much for the introduction, Nuno, and thank you again to Ian for inviting me to give the Stimson lectures. It's truly a pleasure to be here, and it's also an honor to deliver these lectures at an august institution like Yale. I also, good Marxist in the Groucho Marx sense of the term, I'm deeply humbled that so many people turned out to hear me talk that we had to change the venue. So thank you very much. I hope I can deliver a lecture that makes it all worth it. As Nuno said, Tonight, I'm going to talk about the false promise of liberal hegemony. For those of you who were here on Monday night, you know that what I did was I really talked about liberalism and didn't say much about foreign policy. This is the first of my two talks tonight and tomorrow night that really do with the international dimension of liberalism. The first talk was all about just sort of getting at the essence of liberalism. The outline for tonight is that I'd like to start by defining what I mean by liberal hegemony and explain to you why states pursue it. Then I'd like to explain when states pursue liberal hegemony. So the first part will deal with the why, the second part is when. And then in the third part, I want to talk about what it looks like in practice, and then finally explain to you why it is prone to fail disastrously. So the first part of the talk is on the subject of what is liberal hegemony. Just a few words about its policy relevance. Then what I really want to do is talk about its theoretical underpinnings. With regard to its policy relevance, I think almost everybody who studies IR in my world agrees that it has been the foreign policy of the United States since the Cold War ended, that the United States has pursued liberal hegemony. And for those who have any doubts, the argument usually goes that it wasn't really true up until 2001, but clearly it was true after 2001. But most people agree that during the entire Cold War period, it has been the foreign policy of choice, and moreover, it's a foreign policy that the American elite loves. As I said the other night, we sometimes refer to the American foreign policy establishment as the blob. This is Ben Rhodes' terminology, Ben Rhodes, who worked for Barack Obama. The blob is deeply wedded to liberal hegemony, and it includes both Republicans and Democrats. There's this myth in the land, mainly purveyed by Republicans, that Republicans and Democrats have very different views on foreign policy. This is poppycock. It's Tweedledee and Tweedledum, right? And they love their liberal. Donald Trump is an exception. He ran against liberal hegemony. And where he ends up remains to be seen. But he ran against it. Now, a little bit about the analytical foundation of liberal hegemony. And this grows out of my discussion from last time. As I said to you, liberalism is at its root a political philosophy that focuses on the individual and places enormous emphasis on inalienable rights. Inalienable meaning they apply to everybody and they cannot be taken away. And the point I made last time, and I'd like to emphasize again tonight, is when you marry that sense of individualism with inalienable rights, you get a universalist ideology. Right? And the point I made last time and make again here is that liberal hegemony, or even liberalism, when it applies to foreign policy, has this universalist dimension that is of great importance. And what it means in terms of a broad foreign policy goal is that you quickly become consumed with spreading liberal democracy across the globe. That emphasis on inalienable rights, which leads to universalism, produces a foreign policy that emphasizes the spreading of liberal democracy. And there are three reasons for that. This really gets to the heart and soul of the argument, and I'll unpack them all, but just put them up in laundry list fashion right now. You want to spread democracy for three reasons. One, to protect human rights across the world. Two, to cause international peace. And three, to protect liberalism at home. And again, all of this grows out of the emphasis on individualism and inalienable rights, as I'll make clear as we go along here. So let me start by talking about protecting human rights across the world. The basic argument is that people who live in a far-off country are no different than people who live in your country. Borders actually don't matter very much. Rights are of great importance, and everybody has rights. And when the rights of non-Americans are being threatened, Americans have a responsibility to do everything they can to protect those people whose rights are being violated. And of course, the most important right here is the right to life. If some foreign dictator is murdering large numbers of his or her people, the United States has a responsibility that grows out of this universalism to protect the rights of those individuals that are being violated. Now, this goes so far in the liberal discourse that you end up getting the argument that non-liberal governments are in a state of aggression with their own people. Just think about that statement. This is Michael Doyle, mainstream, prominent, liberal international relations theorist at Columbia University. He's basically saying non-liberal governments, no matter what they do, non-liberal governments are in a state of aggression with their own people. What happens here is that you go from a situation where you can use your military forces to intervene in different countries when there are gross violations of individual rights and fix the problem and then leave. You go from that more modest policy to one where you decide that the best way to protect rights is simply to turn another country into a liberal democracy. Because once it's a liberal democracy, the individual rights, which are privileged in liberalism, are protected by definition. So if you have a planet that is filled with nothing but liberal democracies, the problem of gross violations of human rights is simply taken off the table. If you merely just act like a fire department and you only intervene in those situations where you see rights being violated, you fix it, and then you get out, you don't ultimately solve the problem. So what this emphasis on protecting rights does, especially when it's taken in the form that Michael Doyle lays out, it leads to the belief that what you want to do is populate the planet with liberal democracies. Second reason to spread liberal democracy, it leads to international peace. Virtually everybody in this audience, I'm sure, knows all about democratic peace theory. Democratic peace theory is based on the basic liberal template involving rights and tolerance, right? It's the whole idea that people across the planet have inalienable rights and that they tend to respect the rights of other individuals, right? And that leads to international peace, right? If you can spread democracy across the planet. See? In other words, if you create a world of all democracies, they're not going to fight against each other because people respect the rights of people in other countries and they're tolerant. The tolerance grows out of that emphasis on inalienable rights, as I talked about last time. This is basic democratic peace theory, and this is the basic liberal logic that underpins it. Right? Moreover, it solves the twin problems of nuclear proliferation and terrorism. Right? If you have peace, you don't need nuclear weapons. There's no need for nuclear weapons in a world where there's nothing but liberal democracies. And terrorism is certainly not going to be a problem because in the liberal story, liberal states never engage in terrorism. It's always non-liberal states. So the idea is to create a world where they're just liberal democracies. And this is the rationale for invading Iraq. Sometimes people will say to me, John, how can you say that invading Iraq was based on a liberal theory? Well, the invasion of Iraq and the Bush doctrine more generally, as I'll make clear as we go along here, was based on the assumption that if you could go into Iraq, go into Iran, go into Syria, you could turn the greater Middle East into a sea of democracies. You could turn them into a sea of democracies, cause peace, there would be no nuclear proliferation, and there would be no terrorism. That's what they thought would be the end result. This is why the Bush administration thought that Al-Qaeda itself was not the problem. Al-Qaeda was part of the problem, but rogue states in the Middle East, rogue states meaning non-democracies that don't dance to America's tune, have to be turned into liberal democracies. So once that happens, then you turn the Middle East into a zone of peace. And oh, by the way, this is exactly what happened in Europe, according to the liberal story. Why do we have peace in Europe? Because it's filled with liberal democracies. And I'll talk more about this in the context of NATO expansion. They don't fight each other. You don't get terrorism. You don't get nuclear proliferation. Third, just on the business of international peace.